Welcome to Voices of Women. I'm Chris Stanish, your host, and I'm also the founder of Women of Wisdom Foundation and creator of the WOW Conference, which has been empowering women's lives for the past 28 years in Seattle, Washington. Today, my guest is Dr. Patti Ashley, and we're going to talk about how we can emerge from these chaotic times with hope and transform our grief and fear into love and grace. Dr. Patti Ashley is a psychotherapist, bestselling author, and international speaker who brings her unique insight to the identification and treatment of trauma, shame, grief, and dysfunctional family patterns. Her signature authenticity architecture model creates long-term changes in the brain and central nervous system, breaking through ingrained barriers to personal freedom and authentic growth, and excavating the truth of self-love, belonging, and connection. Dr. Ashley has counseled individuals, couples, families, and groups in mental health agencies, psychiatric hospitals, and private practice settings for over 35 years. She also developed and taught continuing education courses for physicians, hospital wellness programs, universities, and several private organizations. Patti is the author of these books, Living in the Shadow of the Too Good Mother Archetype, Letters to Freedom, and the new book that was just released this summer, Shame-Informed Therapy, The Art and Architecture of Reconstructing the Authentic Self. So welcome, Patti.
Hi, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yes, well, so many of us are experiencing grief, and it's such a chaotic time in our current world situation that we are navigating, and it tends to, well, people react differently, and some people kind of paralyzes us into fear and inaction. So let's first talk about grief that we're experiencing now in this current situation, the circumstances. And to me, it feels very compounded by many things. You know, it hit first with COVID, and then Black Lives Matter, and now we got politics and economics and even the Postal Service. People, so what is that doing to us?
Well, I'm calling it collective grief, there's so many layers. Like you said, it's very complex, but there's a lot of loss. There's the impending fear of losing someone from COVID, which is the big overall arching piece, which is why we're all kind of taking ease in our lives a little bit to kind of minimize that. And then there's the loss of people who we can't really connect with when they're dying, especially when we were in quarantine. So there's extra loss. There's so many layers of loss, and then there's the loss of jobs, there's the economy, and yeah, Black Lives Matters, all the protest and our politics. It's just so much grief and fear right now. And so what happens with grief and fear is it creates a trauma response in the nervous system, a fight, flight, or freeze. And so that's kind of what we're noticing people are going through is a lot of the frontal lobes offline in terms of being able to have logical thinking, and they're reacting in different ways. And yeah, it's a
Yeah, it's just
challenging time. Right.
That's the advice, breathe.
That it is definitely the advice.
Well, is this grief unique in any ways? I mean, I know many of us know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the 5 stages of grief, and perhaps you want to go over that a little bit, and then how that applies to today, what we're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kubler-Ross was a pioneer in studying grief and death and dying, and she came up with this common or experience of grief. It's not linear, but she came up with 5 stages, which is denial, and then bargaining, and then anger, and then depression and acceptance. And so what I was saying to some colleagues today is I think I fell into the depression part because my office, I can't see clients in anymore. And at the beginning, I was kind of in the denial and bargaining, like, no, so in the denial part, we're kind of in shock. It's like when you're in a car accident, you don't necessarily feel tremendous pain. Say if your leg is broken or something, you go into a shock. It's the same thing with our emotional bodies. When we're experiencing grief, our first reaction is usually not to feel. So that's the denial. And then we kind of go into bargaining, like, well, what if, what if this is over? Maybe I could see clients in my office. I'm speaking in terms of my experience of grief right now. My one little piece, I know everyone has so many different other types of grief going on, but this is my experience. So, at first I was like, well, maybe I could start seeing people, maybe it won't last that long, blah, blah, blah. And then I think, no, I finally hit the sadness, the depression. Oh no, the anger. The anger's next. So then people don't think of anger as part of grief typically, because especially if someone's died, we don't want to be angry at somebody for dying. But anger actually energizes us and helps us move away from the situation. It finally, when we get mad at grief, maybe we could look at what's happening with, the racial protests. The people are mad. We're just mad that things have got to change. And then depression is the next one, which is just a deep sadness around everything. I learned a long time ago from a great professor that all depression is unresolved grief. Now, a lot of my colleagues might argue with me, but I kind of operate under that notion when I'm working with a client. Where's the grief? Where's the loss when they're experiencing depression? And it doesn't have to be a death. It could be a job change, a move, kids leaving home, even a marriage. There's grief because we're letting go of our single life, right? So there's all kinds of grief that we don't really think of very often. And so we can usually, when we recognize the grief, it kind of gives us permission to move through it. And then acceptance, of course, is the last stage of grief. And these stages aren't linear, so we can go in and out and battle around, and and it could take as long as it takes. And that's the thing, grief is very personal for everyone. So yeah, I think if you look at what's going on in the world right now, especially with, like businesses that are closing, there's big grief in that. Not being able to visit with our friends. For me, it's grieving. I live in beautiful Colorado, and we have outdoor concerts all summer that are free on the lawns, till 9, 10 o'clock because it stays light here. And none of that happened this summer. And so there's a peace that we feel in our bodies when we have to let go of something that we really are familiar with. So we're all experiencing that in so many different ways right now.
Yeah, so our lives have, and in different degrees, our lives have changed a lot. And doing the things that we love to do, and I can't do that now. We can't go to movies. We can't go out to dinner. We can get takeout. There are restaurants open now, but my husband is immune suppressed, and we're just not doing that. I think there might be some outdoor ones that we would feel comfortable, but I don't know. And I think right now is that uncertainty, like how long is this going to last, even compounds this grief.
Absolutely, because we humans, we like to be in charge. We want to have control over our lives. And I think that's the biggest lesson we learn in times like this, is that the serenity prayer in AA, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think, what can we change? So we can change how we do our lives in our homes. I'm lucky I can entertain myself. I love to paint and sing and play the guitar and, collage. And so I can find a multitude of things to do, at home. But it gets old after a while. But, that is something that I can change in the experience. I can't change the way life looks out there. I can only change my own inner experience of it. And I think the thing about grief is, and my experience with grief has been, my father died when I was a child, a sudden heart attack, and then my fiance died 4 years ago of a sudden heart attack as well. And so I wrote my memoir about that, because my whole life's journey has been trying to understand what happens when people die, and what is grief, because I was raised in a Catholic family and I was told he was in heaven and I should be happy. And I was 11 years old and I was not happy, but nobody wanted to talk about it. And I didn't understand what I was feeling. I didn't know what to do with those feelings. So that's why I became a therapist. So I had spent all these years of my life personally and professionally understanding grief, and then I re-experience it again with my partner. So grief is a difficult taskmaster. And if we're willing to allow ourselves to learn from that experience, we can find some grace. And that's why I call it my course, Transforming Fear and Love. Transforming Grief and Fear into Love and Grace, because that's what we all want. But the thing is, we try and go around grief instead of going through it. And so what we really need our enlightened witnesses to hold us in our grief and to give us permission to grieve. And I think that's the thing. I didn't have permission most of my life until I went back to school and became a therapist and learned all about grief. I didn't know that what it was like and what to do with it. And it's pretty brutal. It's pretty painful. And we need people who can witness that and guide us through it, which is what I do in my work. But there's also the element of holding the paradox. So we don't have to drown in the grief. We can also hold the gratitude and grace of our lives, because we can have good things happening while we're grieving. So I think people are talking about that with the Corona coaster, right? They're talking about they're up and they're down and they're up and they're down and they're up and they're down. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's nice to be home. And then it's like, I can't stand being home. And I think, that's the paradox of this experience as well. And I think there will be, I would imagine there's going to be some deep insights for people in this time. And that's what transformation is. And that's, what your work, right, is transformation. And that's the alchemy.
I think there's a lot of growth here, and it's a lot of time for introspection and really tuning into what do you want in your life and what do you want to do and what's your legacy. It really gives us time. And one thing I found in the beginning was, for myself, was a lack of motivation. Like I felt good if I got one thing done a day.
Yeah.
And sometimes I still feel that way, but now my to-do list has kind of dwindled down. It took me forever, kind of like, I just need to be done today or tomorrow. I keep, moving it to the next day. And I'm finally at a place. So now I signed up for some watercolor classes online, and I'm doing watercolors, which I never thought I could do before. I haven't done art for quite a while, and I never really understood watercolor, and it's exciting to do that. But I wanted to mention, I was in a workshop with a minister at our church in Seattle, Amazing Grace Spiritual Center. It's a Center for Spiritual Living Church. And Reverend Savannah Riker did a workshop on how to be brave in these chaotic times. And with all the exercises, the last thing was writing a letter to grief. And at the end, it was interesting how it tied the whole thing in, from the first issue that we were working with to childhood issues and in the end, grief. Writing a letter to grief just brought up all sorts of issues, to heal or to look at. And it's like tied. So what you're talking about is like grief does underline a lot of things, like you say, depression and things that are going on in life that we don't understand or we don't want to deal with, that whole avoidance, and just writing the letter to grief, things come out of your unconscious when you start writing like that.
I love letter writing. That is such a good tool for inner work. And, I have lots of different ways we can write letters to even the people who've passed away, or our inner child, or to grief, itself, or to fear, like what am I afraid of? So that's a great exercise. Yeah.
Yes. So you also tie in grief and fear with our nervous system responses. Maybe you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as my current book on shame, I learned about the neurobiology of shame and trauma, and how I knew about trauma, but I realized that shame, which is the feeling of not being lovable, how it gets set up in the implicit nonverbal memory early on, very much like trauma, and often goes hand in hand with trauma. But what happens is it triggers the nervous system to activate as if there's fear. So grief feels like fear in so many ways, because, oh my gosh, what's going to happen without this person? Or how am I going to live without this, neighborhood that I've moved out of, or this job, or, so there's a fear. So we go into a nervous system response, because the reptilian brain gets activated, because even though our brains have evolved into much bigger, capacity, we tend to go into the reptilian brain, which is the saber-toothed tiger is chasing us. So grief and fear is similar as it is with shame and trauma to this, like I said earlier, I'm going to fight, flight, or freeze. And my frontal lobe is no longer accessible, and so sometimes I act out in different ways. So what we really want to do is come into, that's why mindfulness and meditation is so helpful, Present moment experiences are really helpful. Breathing, like we said earlier, just breathe, you know, and to get the frontal lobe back online. And then sometimes that helps us find tools and ways to really move through grief and fear. But the vagus nerve polyvagal theory has shown that this is the largest cranial nerve that goes from the brainstem. So the back of the brain that's, in this fight or flight, that actually activates this whole nervous system. And that's why sometimes we have digestive issues, it affects our heart rate. And so it really is a somatic body experience. And so we want to get into the present moment, back into our body. And most importantly is tell our body that we're safe. Because there's something in the reptilian brain that says danger, danger, danger.
Yeah, and I think it brings up a lot of anxiety. I have sometimes problems sleeping, and lately during this past month, my stomach tends to tense up and I feel this anxiety, and I have to get up, have a bowl of cereal and walk around and go back to bed and try to go to sleep. And it's kind of more anxiety of I'm not getting to sleep, which didn't used to happen before. When I couldn't get to sleep, I would get up and read. I didn't have that. So it's kind of, and I think it's related to all this, what's going on too. And so I'm kind of struggling with that because it's an uncomfortable, when it becomes a physical feeling, then not just you feel anxious, but you're feeling and your body's reacting.
Right, right. And the vagus nerve, the polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory has given us so much insight into why that happens. Why we can't just heal from the neck up. So long we've been in cognitive therapy, let's just change your thoughts and, do something positive, when yet the body memory, as Bessel van der Kolk says in his book, The Body Keeps Score, the body memory is always going to override the cognitive thought.
Right.
Again, the nervous system is, telling the body that it's in danger and it needs something. And it's all unconscious and it's all implicit. And that's why when you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, I don't even know what I'm anxious about, there's something in the body memory that's getting activated. And usually they're unconscious implicit memories. And that's why present moment, coming into the present moment, finding safety. I always say the Fantastic Five. Find 5 things around you that are safe right now. And even the blankets at night, weighted blankets are great because they help, calm the nervous system because of the pressure. It's a little hot for weighted blankets in the summer, but they're great. Even wrapping up in a blanket. I have a hammock swing in my backyard, and I, curve into the hammock, and that really feels good to my body. So whatever you can do in the body that feels comfortable and safe, and then the body goes, oh, okay, right. And we may not remember why we don't feel emotionally safe because it was old stuff and it's getting activated now in this pandemic and uncertain times. But we want to come into present moment safety. So Fantastic 5 things. If we can do 5, the 5 senses is helpful too. Like if you imagine appreciation, what does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? And so you bring in experiences of body safety through the senses, and you activate that, and that's the first step. So you can do that in the middle of the night when you wake up. Just find 5 things. Of course, I love the soft sheets and the hotel comforters and the cushy bed. That's like for my soft pillow. That's for me, as I'm going to be as comfortable as I can at night to help me sleep. So that's usually when it shows up at night, our unconscious fears.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, it says I'm not waking up, I'm not getting to sleep. So then that makes it more anxious. So I want to talk about, the resistance to this, what's going on. And I wonder also how that plays. There's a lot of people kind of in denial of that there's even a pandemic, or it's lies, or it's way out of proportion. Look what it's done to the economy. So we shouldn't even buy into this. Is that part of the grief cycle and the denial, or that's just their belief system and they're going with that?
I can't honestly answer that. I don't know, but what I do know is I had group supervision with 3 other therapists today. We meet every other week, and we were having this conversation. One of them was a former engineer, and he was saying, and historically in pandemics, people just did their own lives, and like half the population died, and but they didn't know what we know now. And then another person's reading this other book about, the ecosystem and all the reasons why the planet is really in a lot of danger, environmentally, and the ozone layer and all this stuff. And so it was a lot of gloom and doom in this conversation. But nobody really knows the answer to those questions. But what we do know is that, and I heard Jane Goodall on Jimmy Fallon, of all places, one night, he said, what do you think has caused this? And he said, we haven't respected the earth. And when we disrespect the earth, things get out of balance. So, I mean, my hope is that's the lesson we're going to get out of this, is we really have to have a lot more respect for the planet and for each other. I think we've lived in kind of this overindulgence for a while, and we've taken advantage of a lot of things, and we get into our power and our greed and our, wanting to be in control. And ultimately now we've lost control. And so I think then whatever stories we make up about what that means, and everybody has a different story, you can tell by our politics right now, of course, and we won't go into that one. But, I don't know. Who knows? But what I do know is this is something we've never experienced before. And it's creating a lot of different emotions for people. But it's also an invitation to go in and really look at some things that in our busy lives we were distracted from. So again, it's always my optimistic hope that we're going to get to a place of what would it be like if we could respect the earth and each other a little bit more. That's my eternal optimism. So
yeah, and that's happening a little bit. I mean, because one of the things that people can do is take walks, and that does put you out in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Even on our street, it's turned into a walking street.
Yeah,
which is great. What was I? Oh, sorry. I just had a thought and it went. But the other thing is children. And I don't know if you deal with children. I know you deal with families, but that's a difficult time. And they've been home since March. They didn't have school this spring. They're still in Seattle. I know some states they've started school, then they've had to stop. And I'm not sure what's happening here in Seattle, whether they're going online or going partially. But I have neighbors with 2 little kids, and the stress of them not to be with their friends, it's hard on them, and they need that social structure. It's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you? What can you tell the parents to help them?
Yeah, it's very hard. And my daughter, who is a school psychologist and a mother of 2, we teamed up and we created a course that's on my website, which I'll tell you about in a minute, but called Moms in Real Life. And she's done some really good work with PowerPoints and videos to help, educate parents as, what's going on emotionally and how do we manage this time. And we did this course at the beginning when we were all still in quarantine, and we created it specifically that it would be something that would last even beyond quarantine, not knowing that this kind of situation was going to continue as it is. The schools here are not opening. They're going to be online in my district. And I think it's incredibly hard. And I think the best advice I have is, all feelings are okay, but all behavior isn't. So we have to acknowledge what kids are feeling, and they're grieving too. But the problem with when kids grieve is they don't have language, and hopefully the big people around them have language that can help say, it's really sad, it's hard to be without your friends, I know you're really missing school, to validate their feelings. And I think that's kind of the newer way of parenting that we just learned in the last century. Prior to that, it was talk us out of your feelings, stop crying before I give you something to cry about. So this is kind of all brand new, to acknowledge feelings. And I think that's number one. I think kids can get through anything if they're given permission to feel their feelings. I think parents sometimes try to fix things and take the feelings away, and that's really an injustice. And I think their parents are learning now that this is something they can't take away, and it's really putting us back in this place of how do we tolerate the discomfort, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about grief. We don't know how to tolerate grief. So it's a big lesson on how to tolerate discomfort in life. And planet Earth has got a lot of uncomfortable things, because there's always going to be grief and loss and sorrow. But when we try and get out of that and go around it and make it better and fix it, we're not really allowing ourselves to be fully in the full expression of what it means to be human and to love I mean, that's how we grieve. The depth of our grief is how much we love. So kids are really missing their friends. We're wired for connection. We're wired for touch, and kids need to get dirty and roll in the mud and hang out with their friends and touch them and just have a good old time. That's really good for their development, and so that's kind of minimized right now. So it feels like to me the best solution is to have a neighborhood, if you do, of a small group of families and who stay somewhat safe, and not exposed to a lot of people. And these are the kids that have an opportunity, just a handful or less, to have some social interaction. So it's not just solely on the computer all day long, and there's never any peers. I mean, kids really need their peers. But it's really hard because everybody's got their own way of managing what safe is, whether they wear a mask, whether they don't, whether they're in crowds, whether they're not. So as a parent, you have to really decide what feels right to you. And again, my daughter, talks a lot about that in the course and how they've managed, to do that sort of thing. So those are the two most important things: that all feelings are okay, and validate feelings, and then, where's a small group of peers.
Right. Yeah, my neighbor, she said even if the kids were going to go to school, she decided she was going to do it online at home because she didn't want her kids to be in that environment of 100 kids. But they created a pod, kind of a bubble of 2 other families, so the kids can play together and they can school together, and it'll give relief to the parents because they can share. And so it's a creative solution they came to what works for them. And they feel safe with those people. And that's the important thing too, of trusting.
Yeah,
What.
absolutely. And I want to go back to what you said about nature and painting, because this is the other thing we've learned about the neuroplasticity and recreating more neural connections that say I'm emotionally safe. Nature, art, music, dance, anything that's right brain and sensory actually helps calm the nervous system. So it's great to go out in nature, and it's great to do art. And again, I love to do all those things, so it's easy for me. Some people are a little like, whoa, it's not comfortable. But if we can step into that a little bit more without the fear of it having to be perfect or museum worthy art or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just playing.
Yeah, just to play. That's really important. That's what kids do. And so, my background is in special education and early childhood education, and I've studied a lot of different school models. And the ones that I love are the ones that really emphasize the creative arts. And so I really encourage all parents to recognize that the ABCs aren't, even though schools have kind of brainwashed us to think that it's the academics that are so important to get to the Ivy League, we've missed these other pieces of this right brain healing. And so what a great opportunity when you're homeschooling to get out the art supplies, to go for a walk in nature, to dance and to play music, and all the things that the schools were cutting out because of funding. I really encourage parents to, if as comfortable as they are, or if you're in a pod in your neighborhood and you have one parent who really likes a particular type of creative art or whatever, let them do something with the kiddos that way. I don't think we really have recognized how healing that can be. And kids naturally do it, right? They don't care whether their art is good until a big person says, "Oh, you're outside the lines," or "That should be purple."
Yeah.
Grass is green, not blue.
My neighbors went to preschool. It was an outdoor school, rain or shine. They're in a park, and it wasn't really academic learning. It was preschool, but it's nature learning and being with kids. And they're very adapted, well adapted kids. And yet I know they still went through the grief of not seeing their friends. And I think it's hard for a kid. They probably don't even know what's this feeling, they understanding grief, understanding their feelings. So it's great for parents to know they need to be open and talk to them about it, and just let them express their feelings and be mad, be sad.
Yeah, that it's okay.
And us too. I mean, give ourselves permission. We have our kid inside that's hurting.
Yeah, absolutely. All feelings are okay, but all behavior isn't, is one of my favorite lines. Back in the day, there was all the same, like anger's bad, but anger's not bad. Anger is very energizing, and it can activate us, and it can let us know what we want and helps motivate us for change. But it's what we do with the anger that can be destructive. So we want to give ourselves permission to feel the feelings and find constructive outlets for our feelings, as opposed to cutting off the feeling and the behavior, because then it gets stuck in the shadow and it comes up some other way. Like we're talking, this nervous system response, you'll have all kinds of old emotions that we've stuffed that get reactive.
Right. So it's a great time to that introspection. But I think too that some of the key things that people can use, I'm wondering your take on this, I imagine might be similar, of the importance of a spiritual community and importance of a supportive community of touching in. I know a lot of people do Zoom calls. Our church does 2 Zoom calls a week, and it's been it's just made it very stable. And I see people I used to see every Sunday, and I see them on the call in Zoom, the videos, and it's really helps add to my sense of being centered and grounded in this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what would we do if we didn't have technology right now? I think about that. Like in 1918, they didn't have this in the flu pandemic. So we're grateful. It's different though to have the flat screen as opposed to being in person. But it's good that we have it. Yeah, very very helpful for people to connect. I do dream groups, and I have a friend. We've been doing a tarot, looking at the tarot and how that affects us in this time, and yeah, and connecting with friends that way, my family who lives out of town. So yeah, it's really helpful.
Let's talk about hope. In this, we all kind of want to have hope, and it feels pretty dire at times, and we're going into the election, and we're going to, with trepidation, a lot of people, and I'm working on like just putting the higher vibration of hope, and we're going to make it through this, and we're going to feel good at the result. And yet, there's it's just, we need to, I think humans, we need hope.
Mm-hmm.
And in this chaotic time, it's sometimes hard for people to find hope.
Yeah, it is, because we have no idea what's going to happen. There's so many stories. I mean, remember when this first happened, a friend of mine who worked at the hospital said, "Oh, it'll be over by June, probably," is what they're predicting. And then it was June. Then it was my birthday in July, and then now we're going into schools, and people are saying 2-3 years. I mean, so there's so much uncertainty. So how do you have hope when this could go on for a while? They're also saying there could be other viruses. We don't know. There's so much up right now for people. So to me, the hope is really going. It's that going in inward, like the mystics. Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross. They went in when the external world was so not great, and they went in to find that inner peace. And I think wherever we go, how was it John Kabat-Zinn's book, "Wherever you go, there you are." That's what we're cultivating here. Is it's kind of also like Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl's book, where he's in a prison camp, and he found something inside himself that transcended whatever was going on in the world. And then, after he was released, he published the book, and it helped tremendous amounts of people. And I think that's the hope, is wherever we go, there we are. So if we can find a glimmer of peace and harmony in the midst of what we're doing, and like you're saying with the art and the nature, and that's what I've been doing too. I made scrapbooks, started making scrapbooks for my kids, my 4 grown kids, and and I last night at the end of the day I was like, that was a really fun day. I said out loud to myself, I was like, that was a really fun day. And the reason it felt so good to me is because I was so immersed in putting the pictures and taping and organizing. And so I was in my right brain, having this experience, and also feeling kind of connected to the kiddos. I mean, again, the paradox, I'm sad that I can't be with them, but I also have these beautiful memories that, I got to be creative with. And so that's where the hope comes. It comes from finding those moments where we can really feel into being okay regardless of what's going on out there. And this too shall pass. The world planet has been through an awful lot. We don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that, when we have that inner sense of peace, it builds into what, and boy, I'm hoping this gratitude, we're going to see when, the world does open it up in a different way, we're going to just be so grateful for everything, and that's important is gratitude. We sometimes take things for granted.
Yes, the gratitude. And, life it may be different. We don't know what it's going to look like. But I think many of us feel like, well, it is going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
This has changed us. We've kind of been
Transformation.
a pampered culture for a little while here.
Mm-hmm.
And it will change us for the better. I mean, I think we're starting to see, well, I think you see the contrast of the for the better and for the worse. But and then I think it's important to who do you hang out with,
Yeah,
to be around positive minded people and people who have hope and people who are grounded and centered and support you, and to cut out the negativity in your life is very important.
absolutely. Because we will get through this. Like you said, we don't know what it's going to look like. And again, I'm this eternal optimist, so I hold on to a paradigm shift, which is yay. Because you look at our systems. The education system's been tragically flawed for a very long time. Our health systems, our economic systems. People are been working like two jobs, and they're still the work. Two income families, and or they're still considered the working poor. There's some problems systemically that have been going on for a long time. Look at the environment, look at global warming, look at we can go on and on and on and on with what wasn't right before all this happened. And we were in our, almost overindulgent, like, wow, there's so many fun things to do in the world. I want to go here and I want to go there and I want to do this and I want to do that. But there wasn't a lot of respect for how the ecosystems and the systems work well and what's really important. So it's a big idea to think that these systems are going to shift hopefully into a more positive paradigm, but that's where my prayers lie. But we don't know. But again, if I stay focused on that, my hope is that energy of this transformation and paradigm shift and systemic change, it could be pretty great on the other side. But we got to get through. It's chaos theory. Order follows chaos, and we're in the chaos right now. So.
We're in chaos. Well, it's also all the things that you're mentioning. I think it's exposure time. If things have to be exposed, we need to be aware of these systemic issues that we have in order to make constructive changes. And so I think we're in this time I think we've been there for a while, but of revealing of our flaws and exposure so that we can heal. I mean, that's needed for healing. And that's why it's also so complex, because it's on so many levels, like you said. Well, what is your last piece of advice for people? And then please share your website and what you're doing that people can check out.
Well, I think that, don't give up and find that present moment comfort as much as you can and get in your body and be present in the moment and know this will pass. My website is pattiashley.com, PattiAshley, and I have tons of things on there, and the courses that I've just created are, the first one's free. It's called Go In Not Out, and that's what I created at the beginning of the pandemic to give people some tools around this going inward process that we're talking about. So there's PowerPoints and videos and worksheets and meditations. And then my daughter and I did Moms in Real Life, which was for parents in the pandemic. And then the Transforming Grief and Fear into Love and Grace I'm working on, and hopefully will launch in September. You can also sign up to do Authenticity Architect coaching with me on my website, and you can also links to all three of my books. So it's lots of things on my website.
Yes, great. Well, thank you for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's such an important time to talk about these things, so I appreciate it.
Yes, great.